Hello and welcome back. Today we are going to take a look at The Medium is the Massage by Marshall McLuhan, who also coined the term The Medium is the Message, which is a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek title to his book, being The Massage, in which the primary thrust is that, or his primary argument, is that the medium through which we are consuming information significantly colors that information and changes our experience of that information. And in particular, this book was written in the 60s. He was talking about the effects of a transition to being primarily print, to being, video as well. But I think that, in a sense, we have kind of transitioned in another way where, he's talking about a transition to TV. And I think what I would want to point out is I think that the transition to interactive or semi-interactive media, like social media, is a sort of different thing. And thinking about that sort of transition layered on top of kind of his analysis is a little bit interesting. So there's a lot of ideas in this book, but I just wanted to point out the book's fairly thin. And then if we take a look at the book, not every book has a lot of words on it. So part of what he is doing is performative in that he is trying to convey information, dually through print media as well as through imagery, which for him was a sort of thing that was taking over the scene. And so here we see, this is an image of several houses or areas, and it's some place. And the idea he is trying to convey is that stuff is built upon a different structure. Environments are invisible, they are groundless, pervasive structure, and the overall patterns elude easy perception. And then he says, we impose the form of the old onto the content of the new. The malady lingers on, and you can see that without context, there's a whole different type of patterning of these houses here. And so he is making the argument that we are superimposing, in this section at least, we are superimposing, when we are interpreting television, we are superimposing the types of criteria and values and these sorts of things that we had with print media. And so, but the point is that he's performatively leaning on visual, and there's a lot of, spots where he is going to have heavy amounts of visual in the book, but there's also going to be spots that are heavily text-based, as we can see here. So there's still going to be a lot of text, but I did want to mention that this is something that is a bit interesting, and if you're interested in that type of thing, I would also recommend Thinking in Type, which is a book that explores specifically typography and how typography colors information. That's a book we've reviewed on the channel if you wanted to look it up or use the search function, Thinking in Type, or Typography will probably also give it to you. Okay, so the main thing is that media is going to color it, and it's a bit like wearing a certain color of sunglasses, right? Or if we wear blue sunglasses, the world looks blue. If we wear our kind of print sunglasses, we interpret the world through a print kind of way. And if we put on our TV sunglasses, we do it differently. And what he argues is that there was kind of a global, the world was much more interactive before print. And that there was much more, communication between people, and there was more socialization. Kind of. This isn't really the primary argument, and I might be missing what he was arguing with the pre-print thing. But what he argues with print specifically is that print is going to. The methodology, print encourages linear thinking. Print is entirely linear. And so what it does is it facilitates, arguments or kind of tracing a line of things. And you don't actually trace a line of things in normal human experience. And what he notes, with, for example, audio presentation, audio is coming at you from all directions at once, and it's not necessarily linear. But when we consume a ton of print, we will start thinking in a linear way. If we didn't consume print, we wouldn't think as linear a way. And so what he argues is that electronic media, and at the time of McLuhan, this is TV, it facilitates a non-linear communication. And so that it is going to be challenging the previous things, and at the same time we are using linear analysis to apply to this. Now, when I think of social media today, it's not linear in the same way, because we like refresh or re-scroll. And so there's like a three-dimensionality to this type of stuff. And also social media is also going to be non-linear in the sense that, it's the electronic media, but it's almost non-linear in an exponential way, because you can consume a video on social media. Like, let's say you're scrolling through Instagram or something like this, and you're simultaneously consuming it, but you always have the option to scroll. And so there's an extra layer of dimensionality to it because you can always scroll down. And what he thinks is going to happen, and this is another one of the main thrusts, is he has this idea of a global village, which is that electronic media will bring people closer together. And in some sense, if you think about what happened, in the 70s, 80s, and this type of thing, when everyone was consuming the exact same television shows, I think this phenomenon actually makes sense and it reigns true. But it's interesting to see that I think what we have with technology today is people all retreat to kind of their own corners of the internet. And everyone just, I think there's a real problem with confirmation bias. They seek out the type of information they want, and then they reside in, ideological echo chambers or this type of thing, or like worldview echo chambers. And so the very opposite of what he predicted with this idea of the global village, I think ends up happening. I think what ends up happening, instead of uniting disparate areas through everyone kind of consuming the same media, and the media being very, very accessible as of television in his time, instead what we get is people not even down the street, knowing each other. And it's like the reverse of a global village. It's like a global isolatory type of thing. And I think part of this has to do with the nature of, the incentive structure for social media companies and this type of stuff. But it's fascinating because now everyone can, as a result of the digital media progressing, everyone can withdraw to their own corner of the internet or their own corner of interaction and just isolate. And also, furthermore, increasingly more and more of our social interactions are mediated through technology, right? There's less face-to-face stuff, so it's not even a global village of sorts, which is the terminology he would use, of sharing a worldview. Or it's not even like an inversing of this, but it's like an inversing of, a more personal type of village. But this is not his thrust of what he's talking about is not dealing with, the future in this sense. It was the future from the 60s. But I think in reading this, or this is going to be heavily color how I would ever recommend this book to someone, it would be on the basis that you can continue the analysis of his kind, with the primary thrust of the argument being that the nature of the thing you are consuming is going to color, it's not just the content that you are receiving. So it's not just the content of this page for McLuhan, right? That is important, but the way that it is presented, colors this sort of thing. And I think of the example of what was the book? Book we just covered, Stolen Focus, by Johann Hari, for example, talks about how consuming information, in a social media form tends to decrease our attention spans versus consuming information in a book. He actually uses this example and cites studies for it, tends to increase our attention span because it enforces this linear thinking and this ability to track concepts over time as you're proceeding through the linear argument. And so it's about technology, and specifically technology, as we're kind of entering on into the television age, I suppose. So it's dated, but I do think the central argument is an interesting one, and while it's pretty thin as well. Okay, let's get into the ratings. So for utility, I gave it a 3.5. I think that, for me, attention is an important concept, and I think for the topic of attention, this is probably a semi-important read, but I think that you're going to get this type of idea in a lot of other places, and the book's somewhat dated. And so it's perhaps more interesting in a semi-historical perspective, looking at someone conduct an analysis of, hey, this is kind of the future, when that future is now 60 years past, right? And so I think that is a little bit interesting, and that, I think that some of his ideas are relevant or important, but I think, we're gonna get into novelty, but I think ultimately this is not like an essential read, and if someone doesn't read this, it's not that big a deal, and it's probably not very useful. Okay, for novelty, I gave it a 7.5, which is a bit of a weird one. Part of why I think I scored it this high on novelty is it's an incredibly quick read. It's this, but it has a lot of pictures, and so because of that, it's really easy to read through, and it's novelty on two fronts, in my opinion. One is that I think the notion that media is going to color, you don't absorb content in an abstracted way. You always absorb content through the method you are absorbing it, and just like looking through a pair of glasses, the nature of the thing is going to color what you're looking at, and so that's like thing one. But also thing two is oh, I forgot thing two. That's not ideal. It's gonna color. One second. I'm gonna think for a second. Okay, so thing two was for me the performance of having multi-layered. Like, he is showing you how you can introduce like multiple things at once, and also showing you how breaking stuff up with text and non-text is like substantive, and so in that sense it's performative, it's fast, and so this is kind of why I scored it high on novelty. Maybe it deserves a little bit lower. I'm not really sure. I think the book overall, I'd be more satisfied if it was in the high fives than low sixes, but we just take the average for doing the overall. For entertainment, I gave it a 6. I think the book's fairly entertaining. The images are somewhat, interesting. There's like one section that's like in mirror writing, which was very interesting to read. Also very difficult to read. I think that text, when I'm recording the video, just shows up through normal means. So I could probably bring up some of the mirror writing. Here, 1 second. I'm going to try and show it on screen. Okay, hopefully you guys will be able to see this, but this doesn't look like normal text, now does it? And that's because if you held it up in front of a mirror, it would be facing correctly. And when I was a kid, I actually learned how to mirror write and read because I was a big fan of Leonardo da Vinci. And so reading through this was definitely very interesting, but that's like such a weird, small anecdote of a thing. But perhaps worth mentioning, it was entertaining for me. And I think the pictures help. Picture books are generally more entertaining. For style, I gave it a 5. Nothing really stood out to me as far as his writing style. I didn't want to kind of include the inclusion of imagery into his style, which is perhaps unfair. If I had included it, I would have scored him higher. For readability, I gave it an 8. I think the synthesis of imagery and text does make it a lot more readable, which is perhaps not fair to include the two, because we're starting to like get on an off-ramp where this is not like a book in the traditional sense, but I did think it was interesting, and on that front, I think I would recommend Thinking in Type over this book, of the synthesis of text and other mediums, or like there are plenty of, we live in an environment where there's very often a synthesis between text and other mediums. Like, there's tons of YouTube videos that synthesize text and other mediums, and so perhaps it's the last novel. But I do think at his time, my understanding is it was a bit more revolutionary. And for interest, I gave it a 6.5. I think that it's really just the one core concept, I think, that is so important, and but I do find that pretty interesting. I find a lot of the ways he presented information, like, interesting and novel, and we're going to give it a 6.5 for interest, for an overall of 6.08, with a little bit of an asterisk in that if I were to rate the overall, it would probably be a little bit lower than this. As far as recommendations go, I would probably generally not recommend this book unless it was sounded fantastically interesting, because I think you need to care a lot about medium or attention, and simultaneously care about the history of it, for this book to be a particular hit, in the sense that this is the book you should read, which isn't to say it's like a terrible book, but for most people, if they were to come to me with like a list of criteria, I think there's a lot of books I would recommend before this, and the opportunity cost of reading one book is reading another book, and so as a result, I don't think I would recommend this quite wildly, even though I enjoyed the book, which is like, it's always kind of a weird one where I enjoy a book, but simultaneously I wouldn't really recommend it to other people to read. I think the big reason why I wouldn't recommend it is that a lot of the information is now hyper dated, because I believe it was written in 67, and so as a result, it's like, what are you going to do with it? And I think that there's a lot of other ways of kind of getting this idea to click that information, that information is not delivered in a way that is entirely. There's no way to deliver information that is pure substance. It is always like mediated by the medium through which it is presented, and I think that this is a very important idea. And like if you're getting like information through a particular medium, it's going to color that in a very substantive way, and whatever to invoke memetics in the Dawkins sense, like whatever platform you are consuming media on, whatever that platform selects for, like in the case of social media, often it's sensationalism, that's also going to be the type of media you're more likely to see. And like I think that these are important concepts for having a meta level understanding of information when you are consuming that information. Where the consuming it through a video versus consuming it through a book are going to have different effects, and they're going to cause you to think through the information differently, even if it is the exact same content. Which isn't to say you should always read books, or you should never read books, or you should always use video, never use video, you should have discussions on this type of thing. But you should be aware that it's going to be different. And if you want to learn something in a very detailed way and unpack nuance, I think usually text is the way to go, because it forces you to have a longer term investment in ideas, and it allows for a long, like, linear exposition. As a result, I think it's going to be better for unpacking nuance. But the velocity on like reading is really low, and also the memorability of like reading is really low relative to video, I think, because video is just like hitting the dopamine stuff. And so this is a bit of a tangent and starting to talk about what I think instead of what Marshall McLuhan thinks, but I just wanted to mention those few things. Anyways, I hope he also talks about like sensation a lot, audio versus visual. And I've definitely underemphasized that in this, because he definitely talks a lot about visual information, and how the visual information is going to be particularly linear versus audio, which is like kind of what he associates more with TV. But TV is also audio and visual. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this one. Definitely a little bit of a weird one to review. Definitely a really short book. I guess one reason I would recommend this book is it's a bit of a layup. If the book sounded somewhat interesting, it's like 140 pages. There's a ton of pages with pictures. I didn't flip through them on screen because some of them have nudity, so like don't want to get YouTube struck. But it is a bit of a, like, if it sounds interesting and you just want to kind of read a book to finish a book, which is a great way for establishing momentum, then I would recommend it on that front, maybe, if it sounds like interesting enough to you. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe. And other than that, have a good day.